Well, so today we're going to be talking about breath diagnosis, and I'm super stoked to have with me, I would say the most profound, tapped in, and real, if I can use that word, breath worker in the world, Edward Dangerfield. So we welcome here to the Institute for Aliveness. And we're going to be talking about the breath. And essentially when you walk up to someone on the street, or you have a client coming into your office or whatever, there are things that we are witnessing this week in diagnostics. And so the breath and the quality of someone's breath, where it travels in their body, et cetera, is what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, welcome, Edward.
Thanks, Andy. What a wonderful introduction. Really honored to be speaking to you all in this way today, and imparting some of the experience, knowledge, and wisdom that I've been gifted and offered through my experience as a breath worker. And so, firstly, just to say that I work in a clinical setting, and so we're using some very clinical approaches to breath work. And a lot of the information that I'm conveying to you is based on one-on-one diagnosis of how I've witnessed the breath move in thousands of clients. So I know that you're studying and working through physiology right now, so we're going to start in the very physical realm of the methodology of breath and how it moves in the body. So firstly, just to explain that I focus on the three diaphragms, the three major diaphragms of breathing. So the first one being the pelvic floor, thin sheet of muscle in the pelvis. The second one being in the rib cage, so the sheet of muscle that separates out lower intestinal organs and digestive organs from the heart and lungs. And then the third diaphragm that you can hear, which is my vocal cords. And so these three diaphragms, muscles, they're controlling the rhythm of breath into those sort of different compartments or areas of my body. And so it's important to start in this place, because we can recognize that breathing isn't just about the lungs. Breathing is about all the way into the pelvis. So just when we just simply look at the mechanics of breath, I can actually breathe through my root, and well, every human can breathe right the way through their root, right the way down into their pelvis, and not every human is. And so we're going to sort of look at the implications and impacts that that has on the system, so that we can then understand a little bit more about how we can get more information and clarity from a client simply by looking at how they're breathing or potentially moving. So we've touched upon, I believe, previously, heart rate variability and understanding of the two branches of the nervous system, and just from the impact of breath, the inhale is activating and the exhale is relaxing. And so when we look at that, we can see that that's paired to the nervous system, and the nervous system is paired to the endocrine system. So in essence, if I take a nice full inhale down into the belly and up through my heart, I'm going to activate my whole system. And if my exhale is soft and relaxed, my whole system is going to downshift. So the rhythm of breath is essentially controlling the rhythm of the nervous system and the rhythm of the endocrine system. And as we know, that's having an implication on heart rate variability. So it's either up-regulating or down-regulating the beat of our heart. Boom, 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 boom. So that's inhale to exhale. So the breathing rhythm is setting up the tone for the whole body in every single moment. And it's important to recognize, I think, as well, that there's no one right way to breathe. So as we've unpacked breathing, we can recognize that every breath pattern, so inhale rhythm to exhale rhythm is the pattern of breath. Every pattern of breathing has a corresponding emotional state. Okay, and we know that's true because when we inhale, we're activating. When we exhale, we're relaxing. So the rhythm of the inhale to the exhale is impacting the nervous system, and the nervous system is impacting the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is being affected by the rhythm of breath. The endocrine system, of course, being the chemical representation of the flood of subtle energy into the body, i.e. emotion, energy in motion. And so we can recognize that breathing is changing our emotional state. And breathing is also the gateway between the conscious and the subconscious. So we have an opportunity, this great tool that is our breath, to check in and to become aware of how we're breathing and how it's affecting our emotional state. And we can use it in a variety of different ways. So maybe just unpacking a little bit about that rhythm of breath and how it's impacting some of the systems in the body. So essentially, let's start maybe down in the root chakra. So the first chakra, with the endocrine system, we're looking at the gland of the coccygeal body. And so that's sitting right in front of the tailbone. it also in men was going to represent the prostate. And so if breath isn't moving into that space, of course, we're going to see stagnation. So we're going to see some potential stiffness in the hips, and that's going to move through up into the SI joint and even create some potential impingement in the lower back. So if breath isn't moving down in that space, visually we're going to see potential stiffness in the hips, a lack of slide or glide between the two pelvic halves, and even an ungroundedness or unsteadiness in the person's way of moving. So in gait assessment, when we're walking with somebody or we're looking at a client and the way they're entering into our clinical space or how we're working with them, we can immediately have an assessment of the quality of groundedness that they're actually living from in their life. And so looking at breath and how it's moving into the next area, and I'm going to use the chakra system and pair it up to the endocrine system. So in the second chakra, we're looking at essentially just below the navel, the dantian in Chinese medicine, the womb space, our space of creativity and our space of abundance. And so we can see how that's also going to have an impact on the ascending and descending colons and digestion. And so what we're looking at is the potential for nutrient uptake to be impinged. And that's simply because this whole area, if it's not receiving breath, it's not being massaged, there might be a tension or holding in the stomach wall and in the muscles, intestinal wall and in the muscles in that lower area. So we're looking at just below the navel. And so that's going to impact potential nutrient uptake as well. So just being mindful that if breath isn't moving down into that area, it's also going to have an impact on the sexual organs. So in women, we could see that this would maybe disrupt the moon time cycles and might lead to some emotional dysregulation through that area and have an impact on potential fertility. And something else to be mindful of is also the appendix area and any sort of clients that have had an appendix operation. We may see that breath isn't moving into the right hip. So just from a visual diagnosis, we can look at that when someone's moving or walking. A much more profound way to assess breath is to lie somebody on their back and to witness the flow of the breath and to see how deeply they breathe down into their pelvis, and even more so how deeply they can breathe down into that area, both consciously and unconsciously. So asking a client to lie down and simply watching where their breath moves is going to give us a variety of indications. So initially we can see how deeply they're breathing into their roots and into their stomach. That will give us an assessment both in their daily life, but also in sleep, as to how breath is moving into that space. So maybe before we move into the third energy center, just focusing on this idea around why breathing is so impactful on health. Breathing between 20 and 26,000 times a day, depending on the rhythm and on neuroplastic breath pattern. Of that, a lot of those hours are sleep. So, hopefully we're looking at about 8 hours are asleep. Of course, if our subconscious breath pattern, so that's the way we breathe without consciously thinking about it, is shallow or is not full, and we have some holding or tension that's hardwired neuroplastically into that area, what we're going to see is in the 8 hours of sleep, someone will not breathe into their abdomen. And so what that means is there's no blood flow, there's no physical massage, and there's no chi that's moving into the large intestine. And so, of course, excretion and waste is going to be impacted. So just being mindful of how the breath's moving into that lower area and how that's going to show up in someone's life. So moving up into the third energy center, we've got a lot going on in this space in terms of organs. The balance of the liver and the spleen, and we can look at the rhythm of breath and how it's moving into this space. It's a very soft area right below the rib cage, and as we've evolved, if you believe in the story of evolution, as we've evolved out of being an animal and we've stood upright, of course this whole area would have been facing the ground. Previously this would have been protected as it's facing Mother Earth, and so as Homo sapiens we learned how to stand. We have this area which is now previously would have been protected is now exposed. And so, of course, the ribs protect the lungs and the heart. And this is the amazing design of the human. This whole area is exposed. And so we have the capacity to contract and strengthen the core for any impact. And so it's really natural that we develop a strong core area. If we were to poke a dog, we would see that the first thing that they do is contract in the stomach, and it's the same of a human. So if we're poked, either physically or if we're under a stress response in some way, the whole body is going to tense. So if we repeatedly tense over time through childhood or through a stressful work environment, we're actually going to see that that abdominal core will contract and will neuroplastically learn to stay contracted. So from a breath diagnosis, we can look at how contracted someone's core is and whether it's turning on or off, and whether it actually goes into a relaxed state again when they're lying on the treatment table. So when someone's lying on their back, we can maybe see that if the core is remaining contracted on both the inhale and the exhale, there's no relaxation response in that exhale. So again, inhale is activating, exhale is relaxing. If they are not softening on the relaxed response, their whole body isn't going into the downshift that we'd like to see. They're still staying in a high tone in their nervous system, and they're staying in a high tone in their endocrine system. So what we'd like to, one of the first things we can diagnose is in visual is how contracted that core is. That will show up in sort of the capacity for someone to rotate left to right in their trunk. And then beyond that, when they're lying on the table, when we place our hand on basically the third energy center on either side, we can feel just below, there are my ribs, just below the ribs, we can actually feel into that space. We'll notice if when we place our hand there, there's a tensing. So if there's a jump response, so that's indicating a high level of preparedness in the whole body system, in the nervous system. And so if we're witnessing that, then the whole body's in high tone consistently. We're in the third energy center, and that response is governed by the adrenals, which are of course just in the back, sitting on top of the kidney. So when we're working and witnessing in this space, we're looking at liver, spleen, and the kidneys and adrenals in that area. And so, yeah, just being really mindful of any contraction in this space. It's also going to impact the stomach sitting right here. And so if we've got holding or tension in that space, any sort of contraction in that area is going to impact the nutrient uptake and initial space of digestion. Of course, liver function is going to be impacted as well. So what we're looking at is how the diaphragm muscle is breathing down. So it's like on the inhale, whether the belly is filling with breath or not. And, you know, a side note, like the advent of so much photography and social media, and of course the selfie, is that we have a capacity to tense and hold the abdomen to look thin or good in a photo. If we do that repeatedly enough, we'll actually neuroplastically hardwire that response into our system over time, continuously. So we're telling this area somatically that it's under attack. It's under attack by Instagram, ironically. But what we're actually telling is that it needs to be tense and firm the whole time. If we hardwire that in during the day, of course, in the evening when we sleep, it's also hardwired in. And so just being mindful of the tone and qualities, there's a variety of different things we can do to release and change that, and to create more ease and slide and glide in the fascia and also in the viscera of that whole area. And so breath's a really easy way for us to see, okay, is my client breathing into their roots? Are they going to be grounded? Are they breathing into the second energy center? Is that going to impact excretion, large intestine function? And then how do they breathe into the third energy center, which is going to govern all of the organs in that third energy center space? And what we're wanting to see is just a gentle rhythm and pulsation of breath that's moving with steadiness. Okay, so moving up now, we've kind of covered the breath as it fills like a glass of water from the bottom up. We've hit this space of the third energy center, and this is the diaphragm muscle. In the yogic traditions, we've covered the self. So this is small self, and now we're moving into this third energy center where I start to move into the fourth energy center of my heart. So we're looking at the thymus gland, which is controlling the rhythm of breath. And this sits just where my ribs come together and move into my sternum, solar plexus area. So right here, this is where the location of the thymus gland is. The thymus is controlling the rhythm of breath. And so this area, if there's tenderness when we press into this space, that's showing some discomfort and holding in the rhythm of breath of the client. And they might actually wince in that area. If we hold that and I'll have them breathe steadily into that, it will actually release. This is like a button, and it can unlock the whole of the diaphragm, upper diaphragm, and into the rib cage. So this next area that we're looking at in breath diagnosis is the rib cage. And essentially you can see like my fingers are like ribs. and they come together. And what's happening is in between each rib, I have an intercostal muscle. And like any muscle that I can train in the gym, my intercostal muscles are the same. They can either have correct functioning based on my genetic blueprint and my DNA, or they can become stagnant over time. So what we can see is the rib cage can actually be stuck. There can be no movement in the rib cage, or the rib cage can flare. Oh, that was a nice breath. I can relax and slow down a bit now. So the flaring of the rib cage, the ability of the rib cage to move, is an indication of the upper lung capacity. So the diaphragm moving down is going to give us a deeper lung capacity down into that space. Breath will actually fill that area. And so someone might be breathing really poorly down through the first three chakras, or they may be breathing really well down through the first three chakras. At this point, this area becomes a totally separate issue. So we can see that breath could be moving well or poorly below, and it could be moving well or poorly above as well. And so that's the rhythm of breath. We can also have people who are a reverse breather who actually breathe down and then up, or up and then down. So the rhythm of breath, how we're watching where the breath moves, is also a great diagnostic tool for us to understand whether someone has this beautiful plasticity through the upper rib cage and whether the lungs are fully expanding and contracting. So we're going to be able to witness that firstly in just like the simple, like, is breath moving up through like the mid chest and then up into the top of the lung space through the areas just below the collarbone? And even, is there a slight increase in the shoulder height when they breathe? So are we able to see that there's a slight rise and fall? Is breath actually flowing all the way up into the top areas of the body? Or is it sort of stagnant and they're just breathing into this third area? So with the rib cage, of course, we've got all of the intercostal muscles, and then we must consider also that that's firing in the back as well. So the rib cage is moving in the back. And then, you know, if we can kind of visualize, this is the rib cage of the back. On top of that, we've got the two shoulder blades. And you can actually find those now for yourself. Maybe just reach underneath and find how your shoulder blades are actually gliding over the top of your ribs. So we can feel that the shoulder blades, they sit on top of the rib cage, and the rib cage itself is moving. So we can look at someone's shoulder mobility, and we can see that if they've got rigidity through the shoulders and there's no capacity for this slide and glide of the shoulder, that's also going to have an impact on the back of the upper lungs. So in this whole area, we can just see like, okay, we've got flexibility and mobility through shoulder joints and through this area. We've also got the opportunity for them to raise up and down with every breath. The impact on this area is going to be huge. This is sort of more about the space of the heart and love as well. And so heart rate variability is going to be massively impacted by the quality of neuroplasticity and the quality of change that's available through this upper area. We can rapidly elicit change in someone's breathing by simply bringing their own hand to their body, creating a neurofeedback loop, and getting them to breathe a little fuller up into the top of the lungs. And it's amazing just what some gentle touch of themselves can bring when they bring their own conscious awareness into this space. Okay, so fourth energy center, the heart, the separation of like me, individual me, into me loving all of you. And then we're moving up into the fifth chakra now. So this is how breath is moving through the throat, and some diagnostic opportunities here for us to recognize how is this functioning with the witnessing of the breath. So first thing we're going to become aware of is what's going on in the throat. So any holding or tension through the front, we're going to be able to see. You're going to see some gripping, maybe tension through any of that space. We can just observe that. We can also look at like the angles. So side on, is the head forward or back? What's the angle of the neck? And how is that going to impact the airway? So what we're looking for is clarity through the airway. And so firstly, just structurally looking at somebody as they're moving, how forward or back they are is going to have an impact on the flow of breath. And then the next big indication in this space is, of course, going to be the voice. And so one of the amazing diagnostics that we can use in breathing is actually listening to how someone is speaking. And so speaking and singing is the breath being given sound. And it's such a beautiful analogy. So when someone is using sound and how they're speaking, we can actually directly hear the rhythm of breath. And how someone's breathing is going to show up also in a couple of different ways in terms of volume. So someone might be speaking really quietly, and might be fearful of using their voice. And someone might be speaking way too loudly for the environment. So one of the first things we can assess is, okay, how is this person capable, excuse me, of modulating their voice? How, I mean, you can hear the tension I just created in my own vocal cords. So how is someone able to modulate their voice to fit their environment? And do they speak too softly to actually draw people in? Are they speaking too loudly, you know, to ultimately maybe be heard or even push people away? So this area, the vocal cords, when they come together, they're going to create tension. So this is like ujjayi. So I'm really having to recover from that. Ujjayi is basically a pulling together and a holding of the vocal cords. For those of you that don't practice a lot of yoga, it's the victorious breath of fire. It sounds a bit like Darth Vader, something like that. And so when the vocal cords come together, it creates heat. And so we can hear that in someone's exhale. When they're lying on the table and they're relaxed, if there's a hold there, firstly, it's going to signify that they are overly controlling in their life. So they are holding on to their exhale. So they're holding on to the letting go. So they cannot let go. And so immediately we're going to see potentially patterns of control with self and also with other environment. We can unpack that more later. But the essence really is the fifth energy center, the vocal cords coming together. What I'd like to hear is that on the exhale, they're just letting it go. So there's almost, yeah, so there's almost no audible sound. You want to just hear like a, and that's it. So we can hear in diagnosis whether there's a slight murmur there. That's going to be a pattern over time that they've built of control of resistance in the vocal cords coming together. It's also going to show up in how this area drops. So whether it's like a full drop or whether it's a, again, that's a pattern of control. I'm controlling my exhale. So inhale is full and voluminous, activating. The exhale would like to see is a full letting go. So this area is also controlling the glands in fifth center in the endocrine system of the thyroid and parathyroid. So that's going to control weight balance. And so if someone's holding on and controlling in this area, it's going to impact thyroid and parathyroid. What we'd eventually see is that's also going to impact how much weight they can gain. So we might see that someone's facing, excuse me, some issues with their weight or with their thyroid balance. And that could be due to basically holding in the vocal cords. That's going to start to resource in the musculature of the neck. And so a really easy way for diagnostics, if you're touching your client and if you have permission to touch, if they're lying on their back, you can actually put your hand underneath the back of the neck and just gently unweight. And it's such a subtle movement. You're going to see and feel how the vertebrae of the neck are actually moving, and whether there's a stiffness there and rigidity, or whether there's just a gentle glide of softness. And so what we'd like to see is that the neck just moves up and down with softness. If while someone's lying prone, that we're seeing there's still holding and tension in that space, again, that's a pattern that they've hardwired in over time. And very much like that third energy center that I was speaking about with that holding and contraction, we're seeing the same quality in the neck and the throat. It's going to show up in movement in the capacity to turn left and right, and separating out the chin movement from the shoulder movement. So we might see that someone's moving more like this, as opposed to like this. And then, of course, we can look at what their capacity is to move up and down. And so without even asking them to perform any of these functions, just in the way that they walk in, again, to the clinic or to the clinic room or to your treatment space, an opportunity to assess what is the quality and tone, resting tone in the throat, and how much tension and holding is there, and how that's going to impact the flow of breath. And so we kind of focused on chakras 1 through 5, the 3 diaphragms, and how each one has an implication to breathing and to the breath, how that's going to show up and how we can witness that in our clients. We've had a little look at some of the organ function that's going to be impacted. We're leaving alone the chakras, the 6th and 7th chakras, so pineal and pituitary gland, which are of course going to affect blood chemistry and brain function in a massive way. And the reason I leave those alone is because physically it's very challenging for us to, from a distance, witness what's going on. We can with practice, And so initially, just looking at the gross mechanics of the anatomy of breathing, we focus on 1 to 5. How's that for a download?
Love it. Love it. So I have some questions that I've saved. Is now a good time to ask them?
Please, perfect.
All right. So first off, when we say breath moving, something I was always really clear about in teaching yoga teacher trainings was that there is no actual air, kind of separating the physiological effect of breath, what we would call breath, from actual air coming in. And so the combination of gases, which makes up air that we breathe in and then our body filters through oxygen, that only happens in an exchange through the lungs, right? And then by virtue of that through the bloodstream. But when we look at the breath and the movement of the breath that you're talking about, it's actually the contraction of the diaphragm that's affecting all of the abdominal organs in the abdominal cavity. And really the viscerality of the organs themselves, where they're able to move, and the space, the soft tissue softness versus hardness or rigidity. Will you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So I think it's really important to just make that discernment between like gaseous air that's moving into a lung space versus breath that's moving into, you know, every single area of the body. So the distinction here is that the lung is the area that fills with that. And as the lung fills with that, the diaphragm actually starts to move down. And so what we're reading with the breath translations, ultimately, that we're doing when we're a clinical breath worker, is to read what is the quality and capacity for the breath, for that viscera to move. And so with men, as an example, I'll actually diagnose or observe how the breath moves all the way through the roots and through the pelvic floor. Interestingly enough, the diagnostic tool for that is the knee. And so we place the knee into the perineum of a male breather to see what the quality of movement of breath down through that space. And so we're looking for basically a gentle fluctuation of the breath all the way through the pelvis. So to clarify, when there's an inhale, the gaseous air is filling the lung spaces, and what we'd like to see is that that is having a cascading ripple effect all the way down through all of the viscera into the soft tissue that's just inside the hip joints. And so what we're going to see is that's then going to be, essentially we are breathing into the large intestine. So beautiful clarification, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And when you talk about knee into perineum, perineum, of course, pelvic floor on the external would be just between more or less the scrotum and the testicles and the anus. Yes. And when you do that with men, this is very male specific, do you ask them to lift their testicles?
Yes. And it's always something that's been like discussed beforehand. Like the style of breath work that I'm practicing and teaching is of course mind altering. And so people are in an altered state of consciousness. And so like when we're asking for permissions, it's really clear that we ask for permission before, and I usually discuss, this is today's treatment, we're going to move the breath down through the pelvic floor. You know, there's a readiness in your whole system. And the reason that might happen over time is because invariably a client who's a male who walks in, we have no rapport. I'm very unlikely to press my knee into their perineum. I would like to establish firstly clinical rapport, know that they're going to come back and see me again so that we can navigate what is ultimately a really big opening through the space, and we can actually unpack that over time. Beyond that, we don't move from a contracted breath into a full breath in one session. And so there's this idea that neuroplastic change takes time, and we have to be mindful of how rapidly we can move breath from the third down to the second and the first energy centers. So when we're talking about this viscera and how it's moving, there's a quality of keeping someone within their window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. And so if someone has a lot of unprocessed emotion down in the lower areas, either through a sexual assault or shame or guilt, the breath won't move into that. So we can rapidly diagnose if someone's not breathing through the first or second chakras, it's an indication that that area is holding for a reason. I don't need to make up a story around that reason. I just know that it's true. And we can invite the breath to move down through there, staying out of the story. And it's just going to start to move the undertone of the vibration and the energy and the unprocessed emotion that's ultimately stored in those cells and tissues that correlates to the body map that we work with in that area. And so we'd invite the breath to move down systemically, you know, over a few sessions. When we get to the point where we can invite breath through the perineum with a man, before we're going to have a dialogue around that. And then interestingly enough, I'll ask permission when they're in the altered state. they will either nod or shake their head, and it will be like so subtle. But they will, I will ask permission, and without speaking, they will just either nod or no, or say no. And so I had a client who I was working with, and it was like 2 months of him just shaking his head. And he was ready for it. He agreed to it. We had full permissions. In his conscious mind, when we were chatting about it, he was like, yeah, let's bring the breath down through that. And then it was amazing, you know, I would ask permission when he's breathing and in the altered state, and he would just shake his head. So eventually one day he nodded, and we brought the breath through there, and, you know, it flooded the whole area, and it was a beautiful release. So yeah, that's the quality of engaging. And, you know, that's, it's a very specific adjustment and support that we make with the breath. And it's something that in the realm of the breath work that I teach, we only, men are the only male practitioners support male practitioners and breathers in that way. So we don't do a cross gender in anything that involves basically the root chakra or the perineum.
What would be the female equivalent?
You know, we discussed this at length in the trainings, and actually there isn't one. The only thing that we might do is a leg compression, where we would actually get the person to press both of their feet up into essentially I'd be standing over, their feet would be into my hip creases, and they would press up like a leg press firmly whilst oming, and that would bring the breath all the way through the pelvic floor. The reason that isn't with women is firstly anatomically, but also secondly, I mean, I'll just speak it how it is. Women don't need to. Like, there's just a greater level of awareness through that area, especially with, you know, the honoring the cleansing process of moon time. Men have a tendency to just not actually be in that space. And that's through like a lot of guilt and shame around male sexuality that seems to be bred into a lot of men during their childhood. And I'm sure that can relate to some women, and I've witnessed that, you know, invariably the breath's moving, and there is a greater sense of awareness with women in that way.
Interesting. So something that I want to talk about here is yoga neck, which you've coined and I love. And by virtue of that, I also want to discuss definitely my own personal journey, and I think a journey with more advanced yogic practitioners, which is a constant holding of Muladhara Bandha, right? The yogic lock of the pelvic floor being engaged and lifting. And after so many years of training this in under the Ashtanga yoga lineage, and a whole host of vinyasa styles, realizing that is what gives you the lift, and also witnessing myself come into a habitual locking of that, whereas that perhaps wasn't there before, that it did take awareness of loosening and relaxing of that. And I would wonder if a female equivalent, whereas you say it's definitely not as needed because of the consciousness, but if a female equivalent would be insertion, right, into the vaginal canal with slight pressure on the muscles, the musculature of the walls and those round muscles during the breath to bring the breath there, because the same quality of whether they're holding in the left hip or right hip for the appendix is to me the same exact as the vaginal canal, the cervix, holding muscularly, and the breath could flood into there, or there could be visceral movement of the tissues with like that pressure of release, for release.
Yeah, thank you. So I think a couple of pieces that come through for me there, which is it's an amazing exploration. The first one is when I place my knee on the perineum of a man, I'm inviting the breath through that, and it's simply providing pressure for that breath to move through. And so what I would suggest with women who are willing and interested to explore this is actually they just simply place their hands crossed over or side by side into that area with probably the hips open and supported in like a supported butterfly pose, and then just hold that area themselves with both hands and just invite the rhythm of the breath to actually breathe through there. And again, it's that quality that you speak to of that softening of the whole pelvic floor, because I think with men mostly it's actually what we're trying to activate is that can actually have control, and with women I think what we're trying to do is actually like allow a relaxation, especially what you're speaking to in your own experience. It's like we actually trained in this holding in the pelvic floor, and what we'd like to see is that actually soften and release. So yes, I think some potential for like some deeper tissue work could be of use. with the specificity of the breath, allowing the breath to do it for us is the essence of allowing that neuroplastic change. So yeah, I'd be really interested to create, again, like we create neurofeedback on the shoulder, simply placing the hands to that space and creating a feedback loop, and then bringing breath through that rhythmically. We may find that the tone of that area just starts to drop and soften. And then quite often with a client, if I'm working into an area, I can place their hand on and then place my hand over the top. And again, just in terms of, as a clinical breath worker, I have a set of guidelines that I work with to ensure that, you know, quality of touch is appropriate. So that would allow like a client to actually hold and touch that area. And again, like clarity around engagement and rapport is essential in that way.
Yeah. More curiosity there that we can get into.
Yeah, totally.
That was just first chakra. As we get into second chakra, I heard you talk about the ascending and descending colon, and you mentioned absorption. So absorption largely happens absorption of water definitely happens in the colon, but absorption of nutrients is more small intestine. So would you group small intestine as affected by inability to breathe into second chakra, or would you group it up more with the stomach, as you said, and the upper digestive tract in the third chakra?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, excretion, I guess, is more like what we're focusing on in that area, and an ability to, you know, get rid of what isn't serving us in our body and in life. And so, like when we're, you know, just releasing fluidly through that area, we're going to see more of that or less of that quality. So we can also look at like, you know, but some simple stool diagnosis and understanding of how that area is moving. It's kind of like second to third. Yeah, I would still place the absorption in the second, but it's kind of less in the dantian and more just like above the navel.
Yeah,
that area
that's small intestine.
Yeah, so I would say like absorption into small intestine. And that quality is, yeah, just again, like moving, it's just slightly above the navel, and we can feel into like the quality and tone of that area as well. So, I mean, like we can map this whole area out quite specifically from basically the hip bones to the rib cage, and we can actually feel into individual pockets and areas and get into any firmness that we can feel in all different areas, and in the dantian itself and the small intestine. So yeah, generally just feeling into that area and looking at quality and tone. I think the navel is probably would you agree that that's the best place to kind of like to move between, like above the navel would be small intestine, below the navel would be excretion, large intestine?
So when I have people find their small intestine, it's actually put your hands in a spider-like position all around your navel. And the small intestine, all 20 feet or 7 meters of it are, you know, tangled up in that area as a center. And what you're talking about above the navel is actually transverse colon. So for women, transverse colon is 2 fingers above the navel. For men, it's 4 finger widths above the navel. And that's where it dips down from one side to the other. So I could see how the nervous system responds, and obviously we're completely in vasovagal territory, is that when the belly breath is in existence, right, when there is a full inflation there, that there is a direct massage of small intestine with every belly breath. And then the transverse colon is able to be kind of massaged by the expansion or the pushing out of the small intestine.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they could all almost, I mean, for sake of easiness, just group it into lower digestive tract and upper digestive tract, lower being small and large intestine, upper being the duodenum, which is the first bit of the small intestine, the stomach organ, and the esophagus. Yeah. And I mean, breath and digestion are so interrelated by virtue of the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system on and off, because when our sympathetic nervous system's on, we do not have the ability to digest, and digestion effectively stops, and you will see undigested food in the stool stemming back from that panic, flight, or fight response, time or place.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you. And I think, even through our dialogue, we can understand with breath diagnosis, it's challenging to say like what's ultimately large and small intestine. It's like, especially when we witness, ascending coming up and then the transverse over and down, we're going to see ultimately like that whole area we can just navigate with our hands, with breath, and with witnessing how the breath's moving through that. And with time, we can start to practice and feel like in the palm of the hand. And it's a great exercise for all of us as well, just to continue to explore that whole area and tone and quality with our own breath. Like having our hands, palms facing down into the hips is a really great way to feel, how that whole area is receiving again the breath, and how that whole area is moving with that rhythm of life that's moving through us in that way.
So the intention of this week is to put on X-ray glasses for acting and being anywhere in the world. And visual diagnosis is really one of the strong points of my practice and thus of the Institute for Aliveness. And so taking it out of a clinical setting and someone who wants help or is investigating into them, and just maybe you're doing a job interview, right? Or maybe you're trying to understand where someone is emotionally when you're having a conversation with them. How can we pick up breath cues? Definitely in the neck, that's super clear, but also down through the body. What are some little crumbs that you might offer in visual diagnosis in a casual setting?
Yeah, thank you. It's like one of those pieces that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so it's like when I walk through the market here, it's like I can see posturally how someone's moving, how their breath's moving, and how that's going to affect their nervous system and their glands. And so I think firstly, what's really interesting is to start to correlate patterns of behavior, stories, and movement in our own life with friends, family, and then just like taking that out and being like, okay, like how is this person speaking? What are some of the health challenges they've faced that like someone that we know maybe like personally or intimately, and then how do they move? And it's just like starting that inquiry, starting that curious observation. Yeah, and then in that way we can start to actually build up our own library of like, oh, this person's got this issue and I notice their hips move like this, and then we start to see that correlate over again, and then it's like someone their hips move like this, I know that they're going to have that issue. And so it's a pattern recognition. And so one of the first places we can look at is the 3 planes of movement. So we can look how they're moving front, back, side, side, and then spiral. And so that's a really great way for us to just look at like, is this person really good at confrontation? Yeah, how dynamic is this person in life and in movement? And so that's that's one baseline framework that we can look at, is when we're assessing movement. Movement's going to give us an indication of the breathing pattern as well. So that's sort of the gross, more obvious way. We can look at some crumbs again, some more crumbs. How quickly people move. So are they consistently moving at a rapid pace? Are they consistently moving at a slow or sluggish pace? What's the quality of mindfulness they're bringing to their movement? How embodied and aware are they of their own movements? So pace of movement and the three planes of movement, those are all going to be of use. And then separating it out, we can also look at, okay, does one area move more rapidly than the other? So is there a sort of an imbalance between like the legs are moving fast, but there's no movement through the shoulders and chest? And so we're just looking at each different area of the body, breaking it down, maybe even into the chakras. How do I see that their pelvis and hips move? How am I seeing that their shoulders are moving? How is their head moving? And so we can sort of just break it down. And again, I can give you the framework for ultimately all of what this means. But the most wonderful way is to explore this human experience for each of us, to find our own way of seeing and witnessing. And so what I've noticed in my own journey is that started with the sort of the gross movements. It started with, oh, I can see how like that one hip's lower than the other, and I can understand how that's going to affect digestion, or that's going to affect how they step forward in life. I can understand how that might affect how they can step back and take perspective. And so I work with a body map emotionally that's in metaphysical anatomy that aligns all of those 2 things together. And so then, over time, we're starting to look at moving from the gross to the more subtle. So then when we're sitting with someone, we can over time develop an awareness of just what's the subtle energy that's moving in their endocrine system. how is this person upshifting and downshifting? And how is that just witnessing even the breath? And so my own journey has been to start with the gross obvious and then get more and more subtle until it's just like, what can I see in the facial response that is indicating a shift in vagal tone? And so that's now like the great journey that we're all on. And we're all on it together. It's just like exploration of the human in this way and observing the human in this way.
That's the richness completely about what our week of diagnostics is about fully. Yeah. And do you have any last kind of hints or clues that you might want to offer? Something that I'm thinking about is just on the level of mirror neurons, on the level of subconscious awareness interpersonally, that when someone diagnoses stiff neck or whatever, that our own kind of reaction to it, as if we saw their stiff neck and immediately released ours, might indicate back to them a sense of freedom. We would be doing the healing work without even needing to go in the clinical setting.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, that's beautiful. And just this opportunity to recognize, as we increase our own levels of self-awareness, what is it that's starting to come alive within me? And what is it that I'm feeling within me, within them? So that sort of surrogate approach to, when I'm around this person, does my breath shorten? You know, have I started to become a bit of a high chest panter? So one of the most important things that we can do is have familiarity with our own breath. Do I stop breathing into my roots when I'm around this person? You know, and is that my response to them, or is that actually what's going on with them? So a couple of things to be mindful of here. You know, is this my behavioral pattern that's surfacing that I need to address? Mm-hmm. Or is this that I'm actually feeling, sensing, experiencing their pattern as well, and that's that coming up through and within me? So definitely an opportunity for us to explore. And it's sort of this tone matching, right? It's like, you know, we meet someone and we can assess from their movement that they're sluggish and slow, and I'm coming in like a labradoodle puppy, super excited about breath work. Well, I'm not meeting them in any way, right? So like, what I really need to be conscious of is like how, as a skilled practitioner, I can come in and meet them. And then actually, you know, in moving into some more sort of, you know, really interesting techniques, how can I start to move their endocrine system, their nervous system through that mirroring? Do I have a capacity to move them? And will they move with me? Are they stuck here? And so it's just like, okay, can I take this person and bring some more vibrancy into my facial tone and my expression? Can I start to get a little bit more? Oh, wow, they're starting to come with me. This is amazing. Look, here we go. Or is that just not available? Are they just so guarded and walled that they're staying here in really low tone, and there's just no opportunity to bring them with me? And similarly, if someone's in a high tone, you know, I'm not going to come in super calm. Can I meet them? And can I just gently bring them into a tone that's going to be more supportive for them, this therapeutic process of self-exploration, and just kind of show them that this is available? Or again, are they just going to stay in high tone? And if they're going to stay here and no subtle mirroring technique is going to move them gently down into this space, you know, if that's not available, then okay, how can I cue that verbally? So like, okay, let's take 3 big deep breaths together. How can I get their parasympathetic system to actually downshift so that we can actually meet and do some deeper work, some you know, some deeper explorations in a way that their nervous system is now impressionable, malleable, and changeable in a certain way that I can serve their highest interest, their best interest in that way.
I love it. I love it. I love it that it speaks to physiologically a lot of what we get into in the coaching course in Spirit in our 3rd semester. So thank you for that.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you for everything. Thank you for being with us. We love you. We hope to have you back.
Thank you so much. Love to come back. Honored to be here.